The massive hall of the Galactic Defense Academy buzzed with nervous energy as alien cadets from 12 different worlds gathered for their morning briefing. Commander Thale stood at the front podium, his blue skin gleaming under the artificial lights of Station Omega-7. The reptilian Vorthak cadets sat in one section, their scales catching the light as they whispered among themselves. The crystalline Solari students occupied another area, their translucent bodies humming with soft musical tones. Insectoid Chittick filled the back rows, their compound eyes reflecting the holographic displays that surrounded the amphitheater. Beside Commander Thale stood a figure that had become increasingly familiar over the past few months. Captain Reed was the Academy's first human military advisor, a tall man with graying hair and calm eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. His presence still caused murmurs among the cadets, as humans were relatively new to the galactic community. Most of the students had never seen one of these strange mammals from the outer spiral arm before his arrival. Commander Thale raised his hand for silence. The chatter died down as 120 cadets turned their attention to the front of the hall. These were the best and brightest from their respective worlds, selected to become the next generation of peacekeepers for the Galactic Federation. Each had scored in the top percentile of their species' military aptitude tests. Each believed they understood the nature of warfare. "Cadets," Commander Thale began, his voice carrying easily through the hall's acoustics, "today we begin a new phase in your tactical education. For the first time in Academy history, we have been granted access to complete military archives from a recently contacted species." He gestured toward Captain Reed. "The human government has declassified over 2 centuries of combat footage for educational purposes." A scaled hand shot up from the Vorthak section. Cadet Nix, one of the more promising students, spoke without waiting for permission. "Commander, our intelligence reports indicate that humans achieved faster-than-light travel only recently." "What tactical knowledge could such a primitive species possibly offer?" Several other cadets nodded in agreement. The humans had barely developed warp drive technology when they encountered the galactic community 3 years ago. Their weapons were crude chemical propellants and simple energy weapons. Their ships lacked the elegant design of Solari vessels or the brutal efficiency of Vorthak warships. Most galactic species had been exploring space for thousands of years. Before humans had even discovered agriculture. Captain Reed stepped forward, his expression remaining neutral despite the implied insult. "That's an excellent question, Cadet Nix. I think you'll find the answer quite educational." His voice carried a slight accent that the universal translators struggled to interpret. "You see, humans have been fighting wars for a very long time. We've had plenty of practice." Commander Thale activated the main holographic display, showing a 3-dimensional map of the galaxy. A small section in the outer spiral arm began to pulse with red light. "Earth is located here, in what we previously considered an uninhabitable region. The planet itself has been classified as what humans call a death world. The gravity is higher than most civilized worlds. The atmosphere is corrosive to many species. The weather patterns are violent and unpredictable." The display zoomed in on the solar system, showing Earth's position relative to its star. The planet experiences regular climate extremes. Massive storms that can level cities. Geological instability that creates mountains and destroys them. Predators that hunt in coordinated packs. Plant life that has evolved to be toxic to most forms of life. A Chittick cadet clicked her mandibles in what her species considered polite disagreement. "Commander, if the world is so hostile, how did humans develop civilization? Surely they would have evolved more defensive characteristics." Captain Reed smiled, and something about that expression made several cadets unconsciously lean back in their seats. "Humans didn't evolve to hide from threats, Cadet. We evolved to eliminate them." The holographic display shifted to show human anatomy charts. The cadets studied the images with growing confusion. Humans appeared to be relatively fragile creatures. Their skin was thin and easily damaged. They lacked natural armor, claws, or defensive spines. Their teeth were small and blunt. By galactic standards, they seemed poorly designed for survival. Note the muscle density, Commander Thale continued. Humans possess approximately 3 times the muscle mass of species from standard gravity worlds. Their bone structure is designed to withstand impacts that would shatter most civilian species. Their cardiovascular system can operate at efficiency levels that would cause heart failure in peaceful species. The display showed comparison charts between human physiology and other known species. The numbers were startling. Humans could function with less sleep than most species required. They could survive in temperature ranges that would kill many galactic citizens. Their healing rates were accelerated compared to civilized species. But physical capabilities are only part of the equation, Captain Reed said. What makes humans truly unique is not how we're built, but how we think. The holographic display shifted to show human brain scans. The neural patterns were unlike anything in the galactic database. Human brains are wired for pattern recognition and threat assessment. They can process multiple combat scenarios simultaneously while maintaining emotional stability under extreme stress. They're also capable of what we call creative problem solving. Under pressure, Cadet Nix raised his hand again. Captain, these characteristics seem designed for warfare. Were humans bred for military purposes? No, Cadet. We evolved naturally on our world. Reed's voice carried a note of something that might have been pride. Every human child learns to fight before they learn to read. Not because we're violent, but because our world taught us that survival requires constant vigilance. Commander Thale stepped forward again. Beginning tomorrow, you'll view selected combat footage from human military history. These recordings span approximately 200 years and represent conflicts involving millions of human soldiers. You'll analyze their tactics, study their equipment, and attempt to understand their strategic thinking. The cadets looked at each other with expressions of curiosity and barely concealed condescension. Combat footage from a primitive species would be educational, certainly, but hardly challenging for advanced students who had studied warfare under the galaxy's finest military minds. I should mention, Captain Reed added casually, that the footage includes conflicts where humans were outnumbered by odds of 10 to 1 or greater. You'll see battles where humans fought against superior technology, better trained enemies, and impossible tactical situations. He paused, his calm eyes scanning the assembled cadets. You'll see what humans do when victory appears mathematically impossible. As the briefing concluded and cadets began filing out of the amphitheater, the conversations were animated but dismissive. Most expected to see crude tactics and inefficient strategies from a species that had barely mastered space travel. None suspected they were about to witness something that would fundamentally change their understanding of what it meant to fight for survival. Captain Reed remained at the podium, watching the alien students leave. Commander Thale approached him with a questioning expression. Captain, do you think they're ready for what they're about to see? Reed considered the question for a long moment. No, Commander. I don't think anyone is ready for human warfare until they've witnessed it firsthand. He gathered his data pads and headed toward the exit. Class begins at 0800 hours. I recommend you increase medical staff for tomorrow's session. Medical staff for a historical viewing? Captain Reed paused at the doorway. Some of these cadets are going to need psychological support when they realize what they're actually looking at. He left the amphitheater, leaving Commander Thale to wonder what exactly the Academy had gotten itself into by agreeing to study human military tactics. The amphitheater lights dimmed as 120 alien cadets settled into their seats, data pads active and ready to record observations. Commander Thale stood beside the main holographic projector while Captain Reed prepared the first series of combat footage. The atmosphere was one of academic curiosity mixed with barely concealed skepticism about what these primitive humans could possibly teach advanced galactic military students. Today we begin with human warfare from approximately 80 years ago, Captain Reed announced, his voice carrying clearly through the hall's acoustics. This conflict involved most of their planet's major nations and lasted 6 years. Humans call it World War II. The holographic display activated, showing a three-dimensional map of Earth with various regions highlighted in different colors. The war began when aggressive human nations attempted to conquer neighboring territories. What makes this conflict educationally valuable is the scale and intensity of the fighting. Cadet Nix leaned forward in his seat, his reptilian features showing polite interest. Captain, how many soldiers were involved in this conflict? Approximately 70 million humans participated directly in combat operations, Reed replied calmly. Total casualties numbered around 50 million. A wave of shocked murmurs swept through the amphitheater. Even the most warlike species in the galaxy rarely engaged in conflicts involving more than a few thousand soldiers. The idea of millions of individuals fighting simultaneously was almost incomprehensible. We'll start with urban combat footage from a city called Stalingrad, Reed continued, activating the first recording. This battle lasted 5 months and involved over 2 million soldiers. The holographic display filled with grainy black and white images of a destroyed city. Rubble-strewn streets stretched in all directions, with skeletal remains of buildings reaching toward a smoke-filled sky. The alien cadets watched with academic detachment as human soldiers moved through the devastated landscape. At first, the footage appeared conventional enough. Soldiers advanced in small groups, using available cover and coordinating their movements. The Vorthak cadets nodded approvingly at the tactical formations. The Silari students recorded notes about equipment and positioning. And the intensity escalated. The display showed human soldiers engaging in close-quarters combat within destroyed buildings. Aliens watched in growing amazement as humans fought room by room, floor by floor, sometimes engaging enemies separated by only a few meters of rubble. The fighting continued day and night without pause. Note their persistence, Captain Reed observed. Human soldiers in this battle often went weeks without adequate food or rest. They fought in temperatures that dropped below freezing while maintaining combat effectiveness. Cadet Bix, a methodical Solari whose crystalline body hummed with confusion, raised her hand. Captain, their tactical positioning appears mathematically inefficient. They're exposing themselves to unnecessary risk when superior positions are available. Excellent observation. Cadet, humans call this taking ground. They prioritize territorial advancement over optimal defensive positioning. The footage shifted to show different scenes from the same battle. Humans advancing across open areas, under heavy fire. Soldiers continuing to fight despite obvious injuries. Small groups of humans holding defensive positions against overwhelming odds rather than retreating to safer locations. This behavior contradicts standard military doctrine, commented a Chittick cadet. Logical tactical thinking requires preservation of force strength for maximum effectiveness. Captain Reed nodded. Human military doctrine operates on different principles. They believe that certain objectives are worth achieving regardless of the cost. The display changed to show combat footage from the Pacific Theater. Alien cadets watched human marines assaulting heavily fortified positions on volcanic islands. The attacking forces moved directly into withering defensive fire. Without hesitation, instead of seeking alternative approaches or waiting for more favorable conditions, they pressed forward with relentless determination. Observe their assault tactics, Reed narrated as the footage showed humans charging up beaches under artillery bombardment. These Marines know that many of them will not survive the attack. They advance anyway because the mission requires it. The amphitheater fell silent as the implications sank in. Every species in the galaxy understood the concept of acceptable losses in warfare, but this was something entirely different. These humans were not calculating optimal casualty ratios or seeking minimal risk solutions. They were fighting as if victory itself was more important than individual survival. More footage followed, showing different aspects of the same global conflict. Human pilots deliberately crashing their aircraft into enemy ships. Soldiers advancing through minefields to reach strategic objectives. Small units holding defensive positions against impossible odds to buy time for larger tactical movements. Captain, Cadet Nix's voice carried a note of distress. These humans appear to be fighting without regard for mathematical probability. They continue combat operations even when victory appears statistically impossible. That's correct, Cadet. Humans don't fight based on probability calculations. They fight based on necessity. The final footage of the session showed the aftermath of major battles. Alien cadets watched human soldiers caring for wounded enemies, sharing food with civilian populations, and rebuilding infrastructure in conquered territories. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. These same humans who fought with such apparent ruthlessness also demonstrated compassion toward those they had defeated. As the session concluded, Commander Thale noticed that several seats in the amphitheater had become empty. 12 cadets had quietly slipped out during the viewing, unable to process what they were witnessing. The remaining students sat in stunned silence, their previous assumptions about primitive human warfare completely shattered. "Tomorrow we'll examine more recent human conflicts," Captain Reed announced. The footage will include guerrilla warfare, urban combat, and special operations missions. I recommend you review today's material thoroughly before the next session. As cadets filed out of the amphitheater, their conversations were subdued and troubled. The easy confidence they had displayed the previous day was gone, replaced by a growing awareness that they were dealing with something far beyond their experience. Cadet Nix approached Captain Reed at the instructor platform. "Captain, I must ask directly. Are all humans capable of the combat performance we observed today?" Reed considered the question carefully. "What you watched represents standard human military training, Cadet. Every soldier in those recordings volunteered for military service and received approximately 6 months of basic combat instruction." 6 months? Nix's translator struggled with the concept. Vorthak military training requires 5 years to achieve basic competency. "Humans learn warfare quickly," Reed replied. "We've had extensive practice." That evening, as the Academy's medical staff reported an unusual number of requests for psychological counseling, Commander Thale reviewed the day's footage with growing concern. The human combat recordings were unlike anything in the galactic military database. They showed a species that approached warfare with a combination of tactical intelligence and emotional commitment that defied rational analysis. "Captain Reed," he said during their post-session debriefing, "I'm beginning to understand why so many cadets left today. This footage challenges fundamental assumptions about how civilized species conduct warfare." Reed nodded. "Tomorrow's session will be more challenging. We'll be showing footage from conflicts where humans face technologically superior enemies and still achieve victory through superior tactics and determination. More challenging than what we showed today. Commander, what you saw today was humans fighting other humans. Tomorrow you'll see what happens when humans fight enemies they consider genuinely threatening." As the lights dimmed in the Academy's corridors, alien cadets across the station struggled to process what they had witnessed. They had expected to see crude tactics and inefficient strategies from a primitive species. Instead, they had encountered a form of warfare that operated on principles entirely outside their understanding. In their quarters, many cadets found themselves unable to sleep, haunted by images of humans who fought not for survival or resources, but for abstract concepts like freedom and justice. They had witnessed a species that treated war as a last resort, but conducted it with total commitment once begun. The next morning would bring even more disturbing revelations about human military capability, but for now, the Academy's students tried to reconcile their worldview with the reality of what humans actually were. They were beginning to understand that Earth's designation as a death world had produced something unique in the galaxy's history. They were about to learn that humans were not just another species that had achieved space travel. They were apex predators who had turned warfare into an art form. And tomorrow's footage would prove that the galaxy had never encountered anything quite like them. The second day of human warfare studies began with noticeably fewer cadets in attendance. Commander Thale counted only 108 students as they filed into the amphitheater, a significant drop from the previous session. The empty seats created an uncomfortable atmosphere as the remaining alien cadets settled in with visible nervousness. Captain Reed stood at the instructor platform, his expression unchanged despite the obvious impact of the previous day's footage. Today we'll examine human warfare from the late 20th and early 21st centuries. The conflicts we'll study represent an evolution in human military thinking and demonstrate their adaptability to changing battlefield conditions. The holographic display activated, showing a map of Southeast Asia with a small nation highlighted in green. Our first case study involves a conflict humans call the Vietnam War. This engagement lasted approximately 10 years and involved over 3 million human soldiers. Cadet Bix, one of the crystalline Solari who had remained after the first session, raised her hand. Captain, what made this conflict significant compared to the global war we studied yesterday? Excellent question. This war demonstrated human ability to adapt tactics based on environmental challenges and enemy capabilities. Reed gestured to the display as it zoomed in on dense jungle terrain. The human military found themselves fighting an enemy that used guerrilla tactics in an environment that negated many of their technological advantages. The footage began playing, showing human soldiers moving through thick jungle vegetation. The alien cadets watched with growing fascination as the humans navigated terrain that would challenge most galactic species. The humidity levels alone would have been fatal to many civilized races, yet these humans operated for months in such conditions. Note their adaptation to the environment, Reed commented as the display showed soldiers using specialized equipment and modified tactics. Within months of deployment, human forces had developed new techniques for jungle warfare that had never been documented in their military history. The footage shifted to show tunnel warfare. Alien cadets watched in horrified fascination as human soldiers descended into underground tunnel systems to engage enemies in spaces barely large enough for a single person. The Chittick students, despite their own insectoid nature, clicked their mandibles in distress at the claustrophobic combat conditions. These tunnels extend for hundreds of kilometers, Reed explained. Human soldiers would spend days underground, navigating by touch and sound, never knowing if the next turn would bring them face to face with an enemy position. Cadet Nix, his reptilian features showing obvious discomfort, spoke up. Captain, these humans are operating in conditions that would challenge our species' survival instincts. How do they maintain combat effectiveness in such environments? Training and psychological conditioning, Reed replied. Human soldiers are taught to function effectively regardless of environmental conditions. They learn to overcome instinctive fear responses and maintain tactical awareness even in extreme stress situations. The display changed to show urban combat footage from conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan. The alien cadets watched human soldiers methodically clearing buildings in densely populated areas. The complexity of the operations was staggering. Soldiers had to distinguish between combatants and civilians while maintaining awareness of multiple threat vectors simultaneously. Urban warfare represents one of the most challenging combat environments, Reed narrated as the footage showed. Room-to-room clearing operations. Human soldiers must be prepared for threats from any direction while protecting non-combatants and minimizing collateral damage. The footage showed human soldiers approaching doorways that could conceal explosive devices or enemy fighters. Rather than avoiding such obvious danger points, they methodically checked each room with procedures that seemed designed to maximize their exposure to potential threats. This appears tactically unsound, observed a Chittick cadet. Why do they not use remote sensing equipment or automated systems to clear these areas? Humans believe in what they call boots on the ground, Reed explained. They trust their own senses and judgment over technological solutions when lives are at stake. The session's most disturbing footage came from special operations missions. Alien cadets watched small teams of human soldiers conducting operations deep behind enemy lines. These missions involved traveling on foot across hostile territory for days or weeks, carrying everything they needed to survive and complete their objectives. These units operate with minimal support and no possibility of reinforcement, Reed commented as the display showed a reconnaissance team moving through mountainous terrain. They must be prepared to fight their way out of any situation using Only the equipment they can carry. The footage showed human soldiers in powered armor during more recent conflicts. The alien cadets watched in stunned silence as individual humans engaged multiple enemies simultaneously while coordinating artillery strikes and medical evacuations. The multitasking ability was beyond anything in their experience. This soldier, Reed indicated a particular figure on the display, maintained combat operations for 72 consecutive hours while suffering from injuries that would have incapacitated most species. He continued fighting until the mission was completed. Cadet Nix's translator struggled to process his next question. Captain, are these humans genetically modified? Enhanced through technological means? No natural species could maintain such performance parameters under these conditions. Standard human physiology, Reed confirmed. Enhanced through training, equipment, and psychological conditioning. What you're observing represents typical performance expectations for human special operations forces. The footage continued, showing aspects of human warfare that challenged every assumption the alien cadets held about civilized combat. Humans treating wounded enemies with the same care they provided their own soldiers. Soldiers sharing their food rations with starving civilians in combat zones. Warriors carrying injured comrades across miles of hostile territory rather than leaving them behind. I must ask, Cadet Bix said during a pause in the footage, how do humans maintain such compassion while conducting warfare? The psychological contradiction seems impossible to resolve. Humans don't view warfare and compassion as contradictory, Reed replied. They believe that maintaining their humanity during combat is what separates them from their enemies. As the session concluded, the amphitheater had fewer occupied seats than when it began. Another 20 cadets had quietly departed during the viewing, unable to process the psychological impact of what they were witnessing. The remaining students sat in contemplative silence, struggling to understand how a species could be simultaneously so ruthless and so compassionate. Tomorrow we'll examine footage from humanity's most elite military units, Captain Reed announced. The operations you'll observe represent the absolute pinnacle of human combat capability. I recommend you prepare yourselves mentally for what you're about to see. As the alien cadets filed out, their conversations were subdued and troubled. The easy dismissal they had shown toward human warfare was completely gone, replaced by a growing recognition that they were dealing with something unprecedented in galactic history. Cadet Nix lingered at the instructor platform. Captain, my species has studied warfare for thousands of years. We have extensive databases covering combat techniques from dozens of civilizations. We've never encountered anything like what you've shown us, Reed nodded thoughtfully. Humans approach warfare differently than most species, Cadet. We don't fight for territory or resources primarily. We fight for ideas and principles that we believe are worth defending. Ideas? Nix's confusion was evident. You risk your lives for abstract concepts? Freedom, justice, protection of the innocent, Reed gathered his data pads. Humans believe that some things are worth dying for, and that belief makes us fight harder than species who only fight for survival. That evening, Commander Thale reviewed the day's attendance records with growing concern. The attrition rate was unprecedented in Academy history. Students who had excelled in previous tactical studies were withdrawing from the program after exposure to human warfare footage. Captain Reed, he said during their debriefing, I'm beginning to question whether this curriculum is appropriate for our students. The psychological impact appears to be overwhelming. Reed considered the comment carefully. Commander, these cadets will eventually encounter humans in combat situations. Better they understand what they're facing now in an educational environment than discover it during actual warfare. Are you suggesting that humans represent a military threat to the galactic community? Not a threat, Commander. But humans think about warfare differently than other species. We don't fight wars to achieve optimal outcomes. We fight wars to win them, regardless of the cost. As the Academy's lights dimmed for the night cycle, the remaining cadets tried to process what they had learned. They were beginning to understand that humans were not just another species that had achieved space travel. They were something unique in the galaxy's history, a species that had evolved on a world so hostile that warfare had become an integral part of their cultural identity. Tomorrow's footage would push their understanding even further, showing them what humans were truly capable of when pushed to their absolute limits. The cadets who remained after tomorrow's session would be forever changed by what they witnessed, carrying knowledge of human warfare that would reshape their understanding of what it meant to be a warrior. The galaxy was about to learn that Earth had not just produced another spacefaring civilization. It had created apex predators who had turned the art of war into a science, and who approached every conflict with the same relentless determination that had allowed them to survive on a death world for millions of years. The third day of human warfare studies revealed the true impact of the previous sessions. Only 73 cadets remained in the amphitheater, less than two-thirds of the original class. Commander Thale stood before the dramatically reduced audience, his blue skin showing signs of stress as he addressed the situation directly. Cadets, I want to acknowledge that 47 of your classmates have withdrawn from this program over the past 2 days. The Academy administration wants to make clear that no shame is attached to this decision. Some species find human warfare psychologically incompatible with their mental frameworks. The remaining students sat in tense silence, representing only 5 of the original 12 species. The Vorthak, Solari, Chittick, and 2 others had proven most capable of processing the disturbing footage, though even they showed signs of psychological strain. Captain Reed stepped forward, his expression more serious than in previous sessions. Today, we examine classified material from humanity's most elite military units. What you're about to see represents the absolute peak of human combat capability. I want to emphasize that this footage was declassified specifically for educational purposes and is not intended to intimidate or threaten any species. The holographic display activated, showing a stark warning message in multiple galactic languages. The following material contains graphic depictions of advanced human warfare tactics. Viewing discretion is advised. We begin with footage from units humans call Special Operations Forces, Reed announced. These soldiers represent approximately 1% of human military personnel and undergo training that most species would consider impossible to survive. The first footage showed human soldiers operating alone in hostile territory extended periods. The alien cadets watched in amazement as individual humans traversed hundreds of kilometers of enemy-controlled terrain, while carrying equipment loads that would challenge most civilian transport vehicles. This operative, Reed indicated a figure, moving through snow-covered mountains, maintained surveillance on enemy positions for 43 days without resupply or communication. He survived temperatures that would kill most galactic species while gathering intelligence that prevented a major conflict. The footage shifted to show combat divers approaching underwater targets. The alien cadets watched humans swimming through freezing water for hours, breathing through primitive apparatus while navigating by dead reckoning to reach heavily defended objectives. These divers can operate at depths that would crush most species, Reed explained. They approach targets through water that would cause hypothermia in minutes, plant explosive devices, and extract without detection. Cadet Nix, one of the few, Vorthak remaining, raised his hand with obvious reluctance. Captain, these humans appear to be operating beyond the physical limitations of their species. How is this possible? Extensive training, specialized equipment, and psychological conditioning, Reed replied. Human Special Operations Forces undergo preparation that typically lasts several years and has a failure rate exceeding 90%, the most disturbing. Footage came from mountain warfare specialists. Alien cadets watched human soldiers fighting at altitudes where the atmospheric pressure would be fatal to most species. These humans moved with mechanical precision while maintaining tactical awareness that seemed almost supernatural. High-altitude combat presents unique challenges, Reed narrated as the display showed soldiers engaging enemies on vertical cliff faces. The reduced oxygen levels affect cognitive function and physical performance. Human mountain specialists are trained to fight effectively in conditions that would cause unconsciousness in most galactic species. The footage then shifted to show powered armor operations during recent colonial conflicts. The alien cadets watched in stunned silence as individual human soldiers engaged entire squads of enemy combatants. The speed and precision of their movements seemed to defy physics. This unit, Reed indicated a particular soldier, neutralized 14 enemy positions while coordinating artillery strikes and medical evacuations. The operation lasted 72 hours without rest periods. Cadet Bix, her crystalline form dim with stress, spoke up. "Captain, the multitasking capability we're observing exceeds known parameters for any species. How do humans maintain such complex situational awareness?" "Human brains are wired for threat assessment and tactical thinking," Reed explained. "Under combat stress, they can process multiple information streams simultaneously while maintaining emotional stability." The session reached its breaking point when the footage showed human soldiers in scenarios that challenged the very concept of survival. Warriors operating in radioactive environments that would be instantly fatal to most species. Soldiers fighting in chemical conditions that would dissolve the protective equipment of other civilizations. "These humans," Reed said, indicating figures, "moving through a contaminated battlefield, maintained combat effectiveness for 6 hours in an environment that would kill most species in minutes. They completed their mission and extracted successfully." The psychological impact was visible throughout the amphitheater. Several cadets had begun showing signs of species-specific stress responses. Chittic mandibles clicked frantically. Silari. Bodies had lost their characteristic luminescence. Even the hardy Vorthak appeared shaken by what they were witnessing. "Captain," Cadet Nix's voice carried a note of genuine fear. "Are we observing actual combat footage or training simulations?" "The performance parameters seem impossible for any biological species." "Actual combat operations," Reed confirmed. "Every piece of footage you've seen represents real missions conducted by human military forces within the past 50 years. The final footage of the session showed something that broke the remaining psychological resistance of many cadets. Human soldiers treating wounded enemies with the same medical care they provided their own forces. Warriors sharing their food rations with starving enemy civilians. Special operations forces carrying injured opponents to safety rather than leaving them to die. This contradicts every principle of logical warfare," observed a Chittic cadet. "Why do humans provide aid to enemies who were trying to kill them?" "Humans believe in what they call rules of engagement," Reed explained. "They maintain moral standards even during combat operations. Wounded enemies become non-combatants deserving of medical attention. Civilian populations require protection regardless of their political affiliations." As the session concluded, the amphitheater had lost another 15 cadets. Only 58 students remained, and many of those appeared to be in various stages of psychological shock. The cognitive dissonance of observing warriors who combined ruthless efficiency with compassionate treatment of enemies was overwhelming. Tomorrow's final session will examine the philosophical basis of human warfare, Captain Reed announced. "You'll learn why humans fight the way they do and how they maintain their humanity during combat operations." The remaining cadets filed out in complete silence, their previous assumptions about warfare completely shattered. They had witnessed combat capabilities that exceeded anything in galactic history, performed by beings who somehow maintained moral standards that surpassed those of most peaceful species. Cadet Nix approached the instructor platform, his reptilian features showing obvious distress. "Captain, I must ask directly. Are humans planning to conquer the galaxy? The military capabilities we've observed suggest they could overwhelm any resistance." Reed considered the question carefully. "Cadet, humans have had the capability to conquer Earth for over a century. Instead, they've spent that time building international organizations dedicated to preventing warfare. They possess weapons that could destroy their entire planet, yet they've chosen to explore space peacefully. But if they're so powerful, why haven't they established dominance over other species? Because humans don't fight for conquest, Cadet. They fight for principles. Protection of the innocent, defense of freedom. The belief that all species have the right to determine their own destiny. That evening, Commander Thale reviewed the medical reports with growing alarm. The Academy's psychological counseling staff had been overwhelmed by requests for treatment. Students were experiencing nightmares, anxiety attacks, and species-specific stress disorders. "Captain Reed," he said during their debriefing, "I'm concerned about the mental health of our remaining students. The footage you've shown challenges fundamental assumptions about the nature of warfare and civilization." Reed nodded grimly. "Commander, these cadets are future military leaders. They need to understand what they're dealing with if they ever encounter human forces. Better they learn now than discover it during actual combat? Are you suggesting that humans could be military opponents?" "I'm suggesting that humans think about warfare differently than any species in the galaxy. We don't fight wars to achieve acceptable outcomes. We fight wars to win them completely, and we're willing to sacrifice everything to achieve that victory." As the Academy's lights dimmed for the night cycle, the surviving cadets struggled to process what they had learned. They were beginning to understand that humanity represented something unprecedented in galactic history. Not just another species that had achieved space travel, but apex predators who had turned warfare into both an art and a science. Tomorrow's final session would reveal the philosophical foundations that enabled humans to combine such devastating military capability with genuine compassion for their enemies. The cadets who survived the complete program would carry knowledge that would forever change how the galaxy viewed the strange mammals from the outer spiral arm. They were about to learn that Earth had not just produced another civilization. It had created warriors who fought not for survival or conquest, but for ideals that transcended species boundaries. The galaxy was about to discover that humans were not just dangerous because of their military capabilities, but because they represented a fundamentally different approach to existence itself. The final day of human warfare studies began with the smallest class in Academy history. Only 31 cadets remained in the amphitheater, representing barely a quarter of the original enrollment. These survivors sat in tense silence, their previous confidence replaced by a profound respect for what they had witnessed over the past 4 days. Commander Thale stood before them with a somber expression. "Cadets, you have endured what may be the most challenging curriculum in Academy history. Today's final session will focus not on combat techniques or tactical analysis, but on understanding the philosophical foundations that drive human warfare." Captain Reed approached the instructor platform with a different demeanor than in previous sessions. The clinical detachment was gone, replaced by something deeper and more personal. "You've watched our battles," he began, his voice carrying weight that seemed to resonate through the hall. "You've seen our tactics and technologies, but you haven't yet understood what drives humans to fight the way we do." The holographic display activated, but instead of combat footage, it showed images of human civilian populations. Children playing in parks, families gathering for meals, students attending schools, workers building cities. The contrast with the previous day's warfare footage was jarring. "Every human soldier fights for this," Reed said, gesturing to the peaceful scenes. "Not for conquest or glory, but for the protection of what we call the innocent. Every mission you've watched, every sacrifice you've witnessed, was motivated by the belief that some things are worth dying for." The display shifted to show post-war reconstruction efforts. Alien cadets watched human soldiers building schools in former battlefields, establishing hospitals in conquered territories, and providing food and medical care to populations that had recently been enemies. "This is what humans call winning the peace," Reed explained. "Military victory is only the beginning. The real objective is creating conditions where former enemies can become allies." Cadet Nix, one of the few Vorthek who had endured the complete program, raised his hand. "Captain, this approach seems inefficient. Why not simply establish dominance over defeated populations?" "Because humans learned long ago that conquered peoples become enemies waiting for revenge," Reed replied. We discovered that turning enemies into allies creates more lasting security than domination ever could. The footage showed examples from throughout human history. Former adversaries working together to rebuild destroyed nations. Enemy soldiers becoming peacekeepers in each other's territories. Bitter conflicts transformed into cooperative relationships within a single generation. The strongest human weapon isn't technology or tactics, Reed continued. It's the ability to convince enemies that they have more to gain as allies than as adversaries. The display changed to show footage not of combat but of its aftermath. Human soldiers caring for wounded enemies with the same dedication they showed their own forces. Medical personnel working tirelessly to save lives regardless of which side the patients had fought for. Engineers rebuilding infrastructure that would benefit entire populations. This contradicts every principle of effective warfare, observed Cadet Bix, her crystalline form glowing with confusion. Why expend resources on enemies who were trying to kill you? Because humans believe in what we call moral warfare, Reed explained. We fight to achieve victory, but we refuse to abandon our principles in the process. The moment we stop caring about enemy casualties or civilian suffering, we become the very thing we're fighting against. The footage shifted to show human peacekeeping operations. Soldiers from former enemy nations working together to maintain stability in troubled regions. Warriors who had fought bitter conflicts now cooperating to prevent new wars from starting. Humans have learned that lasting peace requires more than military victory, Reed said. It requires building relationships based on mutual respect and shared interests. Every enemy we defeat honorably becomes a potential ally. The session's most profound moment came when the display showed human military cemeteries, rows of markers, honoring fallen soldiers with sections dedicated to former enemies who had died fighting alongside human forces in later conflicts. These warriors, Reed indicated the memorial markers, died fighting beside soldiers whose grandfathers they had once battled. This is what humans mean when we talk about winning the peace. Cadet Nix spoke for the remaining students. Captain, my species has studied warfare for thousands of years. We've analyzed combat techniques from dozens of civilizations. We've never encountered anything like what you've shown us. Humans don't fight wars to achieve optimal outcomes, Reed replied. We fight wars to win them completely, and then we spend even more effort ensuring that the victory serves everyone's interests. The final footage showed something that challenged every assumption the alien cadets held about military thinking. Human soldiers teaching former enemies how to build democratic institutions. Warriors becoming teachers and engineers. Combat veterans dedicating their lives to preventing future conflicts. This is the ultimate human military objective, Reed explained. Not conquest, but the creation of conditions where warfare becomes unnecessary. We fight so that future generations won't have to. Commander Thale stepped forward as the footage concluded. Cadets, those of you who have completed this program will become the first multi-species unit trained in human military philosophy. You'll carry knowledge that will reshape how the galaxy approaches conflict resolution. The remaining students sat in contemplative silence, processing the full implications of what they had learned. They had witnessed not just superior military capabilities, but a fundamental approach to existence that transcended species boundaries. Captain, Cadet Nix said finally, are humans planning to teach these principles to other species? Reed smiled, and for the first time in 5 days it was an expression of genuine warmth rather than professional courtesy. Cadet, humans don't impose their values on other species. We simply demonstrate them through our actions and let others decide for themselves. But if other species adopted human military philosophy, wouldn't that create a more peaceful galaxy? That's the hope, Reed replied. Humans believe that the best way to prevent war is to ensure that everyone understands both its true cost and its proper purpose. As the final session concluded, the 31 surviving cadets understood they had been fundamentally changed by their experience. They had witnessed something unprecedented in galactic history. a species that had evolved on a death world and turned warfare into an art form, yet maintained compassion and moral standards that surpassed most peaceful civilizations. "You now understand what makes humans unique," Commander Thale announced. "You've seen warriors who fight not for survival or conquest, but for ideals that transcend species boundaries. You've witnessed the only species in galactic history that has turned their greatest weakness into their greatest strength." The cadets filed out of the amphitheater with a profound sense of having witnessed something that would shape the future of galactic civilization. They carried knowledge of human warfare that would influence military thinking for generations to come. Captain Reed remained at the instructor platform, gathering his materials as the hall emptied. Commander Thale approached him with a question that had been building throughout the 5-day program. "Captain, what do you think this means for the future of human relations with other species?" Reed considered the question carefully. "Commander, humans have always believed that the best way to ensure peace is to be prepared for war. Now the galaxy understands what that preparation looks like. Are you suggesting that other species will fear humans?" "I'm suggesting that other species will respect humans. Fear leads to conflict. Respect leads to cooperation." As the lights dimmed in the Academy's corridors, the surviving cadets began spreading word of what they had witnessed. Stories of human military capability would spread throughout the galaxy, creating a new understanding of what the species from the outer spiral arm actually represented. The galaxy was about to learn that humanity's greatest achievement was not conquering a death world or achieving faster-than-light travel. It was developing a philosophy that allowed them to be simultaneously the most dangerous and most compassionate species in known space. The Academy's first human warfare studies program had concluded, but its impact would resonate throughout galactic civilization for centuries to come. The 31 cadets who survived the complete curriculum would become ambassadors for a new understanding of what it meant to be both a warrior and a peacemaker. Humanity had just recruited its first alien disciples in the art of war, and through them, the galaxy would learn that true strength came not from the ability to destroy enemies, but from the wisdom to turn them into friends. The species that had evolved on a death world had become teachers of life, and their lessons would reshape the future of galactic civilization.